Karen was not your typical traveler. She wasn't the kind of person who spent months planning every detail of her trips or reading guidebooks cover to cover. Instead, she preferred spontaneity, embracing the thrill of the unknown and letting her instincts guide her adventures. Born and raised in a quiet Midwestern town surrounded by cornfields and friendly neighbors, Karen often dreamed of escaping the monotony of her daily life. Her passport was her ticket to freedom. And this time, her destination was London, one of the most iconic cities in the world. The moment Karen stepped off the plane, she felt a rush of excitement. The bustling streets, historic landmarks, and vibrant energy of the city captivated her. It was everything she had imagined and more. Armed with her camera, a map, and an insatiable curiosity, Karen dove headfirst into exploring the city's treasures. From the towering Big Ben to the sprawling Hyde Park, each corner of London seemed to whisper stories of its rich history. But there was one place Karen couldn't wait to visit: Buckingham Palace. On the morning of her planned visit, Karen woke up early, eager to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. She had seen videos of it online: the synchronized marching, the red uniforms, the elaborate hats, and she wanted to experience it firsthand. As she made her way through the crowded streets, the air buzzed with anticipation. Tourists from all over the world gathered outside the palace gates, their cameras ready to capture the spectacle. Karen joined them, blending into the sea of excited faces. When the ceremony began, Karen watched in awe as the guards performed their duties with precision and grace. Their unwavering focus and discipline fascinated her. Each movement was calculated, each step deliberate. They stood like statues, their rifles resting on their shoulders, exuding an aura of authority and tradition. Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for these men and women who dedicated their lives to protecting such a historic institution. But admiration quickly turned into mischief. Karen had always been someone who lived in the moment, unafraid to push boundaries just to see what would happen. Back home, her friends often teased her about her impulsive nature. "You never know unless you try," she would say with a shrug whenever they questioned her antics. Now, standing among hundreds of tourists, Karen's mind started racing with possibilities. What if she did something unexpected? Something daring? Something no one else would dare to do? Her eyes landed on one of the guards nearby, a tall figure standing perfectly still, his rifle glinting under the sunlight. A wild thought crossed her mind. What if I grabbed that rifle? At first, she dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Surely, nothing bad could come from a harmless prank, right? After all, everyone knew the guards weren't allowed to react. They were trained to stay stoic, no matter what happened. Besides, Karen didn't mean any harm. She just wanted to have a little fun, maybe get a laugh or two from the crowd. With a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling inside her, Karen decided to go for it. She convinced herself that this would be a story worth telling, a quirky memory to share with her friends back home. Little did she know, this seemingly innocent decision would set off a chain reaction she could never have anticipated. As the ceremony continued, Karen's heart began to race. The guard she had been eyeing stood motionless, his rifle resting on his shoulder, as if it were part of him. Tourists around her snapped photos and whispered excitedly, completely unaware of the reckless idea brewing in Karen's mind. She glanced at the crowd, then back at the guard, and felt a strange surge of confidence. It's just a joke, she thought to herself. No one will get hurt. It'll be funny. Taking a deep breath, Karen stepped forward, closing the gap between herself and the guard. Her pulse quickened with every step, but she pushed aside the tiny voice in her head that screamed for her to stop. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and grabbed the rifle right off the guard's shoulder. For a split second, everything seemed frozen. The guard, the tourists, even the air itself. Karen held the heavy weapon awkwardly in her hands, grinning ear to ear, expecting laughter or playful gasps from the crowd. But instead of amusement, silence fell over the area. The guard's expression didn't change. He remained as stoic as before, but something shifted in the atmosphere. Karen noticed the subtle tension rippling through the other guards nearby. They straightened their postures, their eyes darting toward her. A murmur spread among the tourists, some stepping back cautiously while others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Karen suddenly realized this wasn't going as planned. Her grin faltered, replaced by confusion and unease. Before she could react, the guard she had taken the rifle from sprang into action. His voice boomed across the courtyard as he shouted commands, his tone sharp and authoritative. Without hesitation, he lunged toward Karen, moving with a speed and precision that startled her. Other guards quickly formed a protective circle around them, their rifles now gripped firmly in their hands. Panic erupted in the crowd as people scrambled to get out of the way. Parents shielded their children, and screams echoed through the square. Karen froze, clutching the rifle tightly as adrenaline coursed through her body. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction. In her mind, this was supposed to be a lighthearted moment, a silly prank that would make for a great story later. But now, surrounded by armed guards and frightened onlookers, she felt the weight of what she had done crashing down on her. Her smile vanished entirely, replaced by wide-eyed fear. The guard grabbed her arm firmly, his grip unyielding. He spoke again, his words stern and commanding, though Karen barely registered them. All she could focus on was the chaos unfolding around her. Police officers appeared almost instantly, rushing onto the scene with urgency. Their presence only heightened the tension, and Karen's legs trembled beneath her as they approached. She tried to hand the rifle back to the guard, stammering apologies, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Tourists who had initially laughed nervously at her antics now stared at her with a mix of disbelief and disapproval. Some shook their heads, muttering under their breath, while others recorded videos of the commotion. Karen felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly overwhelmed. What had started as a harmless act of spontaneity had spiraled into something far more serious than she could have imagined. As the officers took control of the situation, Karen realized there was no turning back. This wasn't just a prank anymore. It was an incident, and she was at the center of it. Her mind raced with questions. Would she be arrested? Was she in real trouble? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. Karen's carefree attitude had led her straight into a nightmare. And as the police led her away from the scene, she couldn't help but wonder how such a simple decision could go so horribly wrong. Years later, Karen's name was no longer synonymous with the reckless tourist who grabbed a Royal Guard's rifle. Instead, she became known as someone who turned one of the biggest mistakes of her life into a force for good. Her memoir had gone on to become a bestseller, translated into multiple languages, and read by travelers around the world. Schools included it in their curriculums, using it as a real-life example of accountability and personal growth. The woman who once dreaded facing the public now embraced opportunities to share her story, speaking at events that ranged from small community gatherings to international conferences. Karen's YouTube channel continued to thrive, growing into a go-to resource for ethical travel advice. Viewers appreciated her down-to-earth approach and the authenticity she brought to each video. She often joked about her infamous Buckingham Palace incident, but always followed up with a serious reminder. Think before you act. Respect matters. Her audience loved her humor, mixed with heartfelt wisdom, and many credited her content with helping them prepare for their own trips abroad. Some fans even sent her messages thanking her for preventing them from making similar blunders. Her advocacy work expanded beyond digital platforms as well. Karen collaborated with nonprofits focused on promoting cultural exchange and sustainable tourism. She traveled across the United States, carefully avoiding any plans that might require stepping foot in the UK, to lead workshops and mentor young people interested in exploring the world. Her message remained consistent. Travel is a privilege, not a right, and with that privilege comes responsibility. The world is full of beauty and wonder, she would say during these sessions, but it's also full of people whose lives and traditions deserve our respect. Though Karen couldn't return to London, she found ways to keep the city close to her heart. She decorated her home with photographs of Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, and other landmarks she remembered fondly from her trip. Friends occasionally sent her postcards or souvenirs from their visits, knowing how much they meant to her. While part of her still longed to see those iconic sights again, she accepted that some doors were closed forever, and that acceptance brought her peace. Reflecting on her journey, Karen realized how much she had grown since that chaotic day outside the palace gates. Once impulsive and carefree, she now approached life with thoughtfulness and intention. Her misstep had taught her invaluable lessons about humility, empathy, and resilience. It had forced her to confront the consequences of her actions head-on and rebuild her life piece by piece. Though painful, the experience shaped her into a stronger, wiser person, one capable of inspiring others to do better. One evening, as Karen sat on her porch watching the sunset, she opened an email notification on her phone. It was from a teacher in Canada who had used Karen's book in her classroom. Attached was a photo of her students holding handmade thank you cards addressed to Karen. Their words touched her deeply. "Thank you for showing us it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them. Your story made me want to be a kinder traveler. You inspire me to try harder every day." Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as she scrolled through the messages. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of purpose. What had started as a momentary lapse in judgment, a single act of impulsiveness, had transformed into something far greater than herself. She hadn't just changed her own life. She had touched countless others, encouraging them to think critically, act responsibly, and treat the world with kindness. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Karen smiled softly to herself. She knew she'd never forget the terrifying response her prank had triggered or the weight of the consequences she faced. But she also knew she wouldn't trade the lessons she'd learned for anything. Life had given her a second chance, and she intended to honor it fully. With gratitude in her heart and resolve in her spirit, Karen looked toward the future, ready to continue spreading her message of mindfulness, respect, and redemption, one step at a time. The moment the guard's hand closed around Karen's arm, everything moved in a blur. The once peaceful courtyard transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Officers shouted orders, their voices cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Tourists scrambled to distance themselves, some clutching their cameras and phones as they backed away, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Parents ushered their children behind them, shielding them from whatever might happen next. Karen, still holding the rifle awkwardly, felt like time had slowed down. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified, pressing down on her with an intensity she couldn't escape. The guard who had lunged toward her now spoke urgently into a radio clipped to his uniform. His words were sharp and clipped, but Karen couldn't make sense of them over the pounding in her ears. Her heart raced so fast, she thought it might burst out of her chest. She tried to speak, to explain that it was all a joke, but her voice came out shaky and weak. "I'm sorry," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean anything by it." But her words fell flat, drowned out by the commotion around her. Within moments, more officers arrived, their uniforms crisp and their expressions grim. They surrounded Karen, forming a tight circle that blocked her from the rest of the crowd. One of them reached for the rifle, prying it gently but firmly from her trembling hands. As soon as the weapon left her grasp, Karen felt a wave of relief, mixed with shame. She hadn't realized how heavy it had been until she no longer had to hold it. The officer who took the rifle inspected it quickly before handing it back to the guard, who resumed his position without so much as glancing at Karen. The police wasted no time. 2 officers grabbed Karen by the arms and began leading her away from the scene. She stumbled slightly, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. Cameras flashed as journalists and curious onlookers captured the surreal moment. Some people pointed at her, whispering loudly enough for her to hear. What was she thinking? One man muttered. A woman nearby shook her head, saying, "This is why you don't mess with royal guards." Each comment hit Karen like a punch to the gut, making her feel smaller and smaller with every step. As they escorted her through the gates of Buckingham Palace, Karen caught glimpses of the ornate architecture and manicured gardens she had admired just minutes earlier. Now those sights felt foreign, almost mocking. She had dreamed of seeing the palace up close, but never like this, not as a criminal being dragged inside. Her mind raced with questions. Where were they taking her? What would happen next? Would she be thrown in jail? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making her feel even more trapped. Inside the palace grounds, the atmosphere shifted again. The open space of the courtyard gave way to narrow hallways lined with portraits of monarchs past. The grandeur of the surroundings only deepened Karen's sense of dread. She was led to a small, windowless room, where she was instructed to sit on a hard wooden chair. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For the first time since grabbing the rifle, there was silence. No shouting, no panicked crowds, no flashing cameras, just the deafening weight of reality crashing down on her. Karen buried her face in her hands, trying to process what had happened. How could something so simple, a spur-of-the-moment decision meant to be funny, spiral into such a disaster? She replayed the events in her mind, each detail sharper than before. The guard's stoic expression, the gasps of the crowd, the shouts of the officers. It all felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. And yet here she was, sitting in a cold, sterile room, facing consequences she hadn't even begun to comprehend. For the first time, Karen truly understood the gravity of her actions. This wasn't just a prank gone wrong. It was a breach of protocol, a disruption of order, and potentially a threat to national security. The enormity of it all overwhelmed her, and as tears streamed down her face, she realized that her life might never be the same again. Karen's journey back to the United States was anything but ordinary. She boarded her flight under a cloud of shame, her face hidden beneath oversized sunglasses and a hoodie pulled tightly over her head. The airline staff had been discreet, but whispers followed her every move. Fellow passengers recognized her from the news, their eyes darting between her and their phones as they scrolled through updates about her case. Some glared at her, while others simply looked away, uncomfortable sharing airspace with someone who had caused such an international stir. For Karen, the long hours spent cramped in her seat felt like a lifetime. Every bump of turbulence, every announcement over the intercom, reminded her of how much her life had changed. When she finally landed, Karen expected some semblance of relief. But instead, she was met with more chaos. Reporters swarmed the arrivals terminal, shoving microphones in her face and shouting questions faster than she could process them. "Do you regret your actions?" one demanded. "What do you have to say to the British people?" Another pressed. Flashbulbs popped relentlessly, blinding her as she tried to push through the crowd. Her lawyers had advised her not to speak to the media, but the barrage of attention left her feeling cornered and exposed. She kept her head down, clutching her carry-on bag like a lifeline, until airport security stepped in to escort her out of the terminal. Back home, Karen's small Midwestern town buzzed with gossip. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact or whispered behind closed doors. Local businesses displayed headlines about her on TV screens, and social media feeds were flooded with reactions ranging from outrage to mockery. Some defended her, calling her a victim of cultural misunderstanding, while others labeled her reckless and selfish. The division only deepened Karen's sense of isolation. Even her family struggled to shield her from the backlash. Though they stood by her, they couldn't deny the toll it took on their own lives. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up, and familiar faces became scarce around their neighborhood. To make matters worse, Karen faced mounting financial strain. The legal fees from hiring top-tier UK attorneys had drained her savings, and the hefty fine imposed by the court added insult to injury. Bills piled up, forcing her to take on extra shifts at work just to stay afloat. What little free time she had was consumed by community service assignments, a punishment that, while less severe than jail time, still weighed heavily on her conscience. Cleaning parks, assisting at shelters, and mentoring troubled youth weren't tasks she resented, but they served as constant reminders of the mess she created. Emotionally, Karen was a wreck. Sleep eluded her most nights, plagued by nightmares of being chased by guards or surrounded by angry crowds. During the day, anxiety gnawed at her, making even simple errands feel overwhelming. She withdrew from social activities, too embarrassed to face judgment or explain herself yet again. Her once vibrant personality dimmed, replaced by a quiet sadness that seeped into every corner of her life. Yet amidst the turmoil, Karen began to reflect deeply on what had happened. She realized that her impulsive nature, which she'd always seen as a strength, had blindsided her to the potential consequences of her actions. Grabbing the rifle hadn't just been a harmless prank. It had disrupted lives, violated trust, and tarnished traditions centuries old. As painful as it was to confront these truths, Karen understood that growth often came from discomfort. Slowly, she started seeking ways to turn her experience into something meaningful. She joined online forums for travelers, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about respecting local customs and laws. She volunteered at schools, speaking to students about accountability and the importance of thinking before acting. While the road ahead remained uncertain, Karen vowed to rebuild not just her reputation, but also her character. The woman who had impulsively reached for a guard's rifle was learning hard lessons about responsibility, humility, and resilience. And though the scars of her ordeal would never fully fade, they shaped her into someone determined to rise above her mistakes and find purpose in the aftermath. Months passed, and Karen's life began to settle into a fragile new normal. The initial storm of media attention had died down, though reminders of her infamous moment still lingered. Online articles archived for anyone to find, memes mocking her actions shared in jest, and the occasional snide comment from strangers who recognized her name. But Karen had made a decision. She wouldn't let this incident define her forever. Instead, she chose to channel her shame into something constructive, determined to learn from her mistakes and help others avoid similar pitfalls. One of the first steps Karen took was writing about her experience. At first, it was just for herself, a way to process the whirlwind of emotions she'd been carrying since that fateful day at Buckingham Palace. She filled notebooks with reflections on what went wrong, why she acted so recklessly, and how drastically her life had changed as a result. Over time, those private musings evolved into something more structured. With encouragement from her family and close friends, Karen turned her notes into a memoir titled A Moment Gone Wrong. Lessons from My Biggest Mistake. In its pages, she candidly recounted the events leading up to the incident, the chaos that followed, and the painful lessons she learned along the way. When the book was published, Karen braced herself for criticism. To her surprise, however, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Readers praised her honesty and vulnerability, many admitting they too had made impulsive decisions they later regretted. Parents used her story to teach their children about consequences, while educators incorporated excerpts into discussions about cultural sensitivity and responsible behavior. For the first time since the incident, Karen felt like she was contributing something meaningful, rather than being defined solely by her error. In addition to writing, Karen became an advocate for mindful travel. She started a YouTube channel where she shared tips for navigating foreign countries respectfully, emphasizing the importance of understanding local customs before visiting. Her videos ranged from practical advice, like researching dress codes or learning basic phrases in the native language, to heartfelt anecdotes about her own missteps and what she wished she'd known beforehand. Her authenticity resonated with viewers, and her channel quickly gained traction, amassing thousands of subscribers eager to hear her perspective. Karen also partnered with travel organizations to host workshops and webinars aimed at promoting responsible tourism. She spoke passionately about the impact travelers can have, not just on the places they visit, but on the people who call those destinations home. Every action we take leaves a mark, she often said during these talks. It's our responsibility to ensure that mark is a positive one. Her message struck a chord, earning her invitations to speak at conferences and schools across the country. Despite her progress, there were moments when guilt and regret threatened to pull her back under. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Karen would replay the scene at Buckingham Palace in her mind, wondering if she could have handled things differently. Would apologizing immediately have softened the fallout? Could she have walked away after realizing her mistake instead of doubling down? These questions haunted her, but she eventually came to see them not as sources of torment, but as tools for growth. Each reflection brought clarity, teaching her to forgive herself without forgetting the gravity of her actions. As time went on, Karen found solace in knowing she was making amends, not just to those affected by her prank, but to herself. Though banned from returning to the UK, she kept tabs on British culture through books, documentaries, and conversations with friends who visited on her behalf. She even sent a heartfelt letter of apology to Buckingham Palace, expressing her remorse and gratitude for the lessons she'd learned. While she never received a reply, the act of writing the letter helped her find closure. By transforming her darkest moment into a platform for change, Karen discovered a resilience she didn't know she possessed. What had once seemed like the end of her adventures became the beginning of a deeper journey, one rooted in humility, empathy, and purpose. And though the scars of her past would always remain, they no longer weighed her down. Instead, they reminded her of how far she'd come, and how much farther she could go. By the next morning, Karen's story had made its way beyond the confines of Buckingham Palace. News outlets around the world caught wind of the incident, and soon her face was plastered across television screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. Headlines blared phrases like, "Tourist grabs guard's rifle at Buckingham Palace," and "American visitor sparks security scandal." Journalists dissected every detail of the event, speculating about Karen's motives while painting her as either a reckless troublemaker or an unwitting victim of cultural ignorance. For Karen, who remained locked in her holding cell, none of this mattered. Yet, she had no idea how far her actions had reached, nor did she realize the public spectacle unfolding in her name. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, discussions were taking place at some of the highest levels of British authority. The incident had rattled not only the royal guards, but also those tasked with ensuring the safety of the monarchy. While many viewed Karen's act as foolish rather than malicious, it highlighted vulnerabilities in protocol that couldn't be ignored. The Crown itself took notice. Members of the royal household convened to discuss the matter, weighing the need for accountability against the potential diplomatic fallout of prosecuting an American citizen so harshly. Karen's legal team worked tirelessly to navigate the complexities of the situation. Her family back home scrambled to hire experienced lawyers familiar with UK law, knowing full well that their daughter's future depended on them. When Karen finally appeared before a magistrate later that day, she looked nothing like the confident traveler who had arrived in London just days earlier. Dressed in borrowed clothes and visibly shaken, she stood in the courtroom, flanked by her attorneys. Reporters packed the room, snapping photos and scribbling notes as the proceedings began. The charges against Karen were severe: theft, breach of peace, and endangerment. Each accusation carried significant penalties, including possible jail time. As the prosecutor laid out the case, Karen felt her stomach churn. The gravity of her actions hit her harder than ever before. She listened as the court recounted how her decision had disrupted one of the most iconic ceremonies in Britain, endangered lives, and compromised national security. It wasn't just about grabbing a rifle anymore. It was about what that single act represented. But then came Karen's defense. Her lawyers argued passionately that her intentions were never malicious. They emphasized her lack of prior criminal history, her remorse, and her genuine misunderstanding of the cultural significance of the guards' rifles. This was not an act of malice, one attorney stated firmly. It was an impulsive error born of naivety, not ill intent. To bolster their argument, they presented character references from friends and family, portraying Karen as a well-meaning but misguided individual who simply didn't grasp the weight of her actions. As the hearing progressed, the judge listened carefully, weighing both sides of the case. Public opinion outside the courtroom was divided. Some called for leniency, arguing that Karen's punishment should fit the spirit of her crime, a harmless prank gone wrong. Others demanded justice, insisting that such behavior could not go unpunished, especially given the sensitive nature of the location and circumstances. Amidst the debate, Karen sat silently, her head bowed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but she hoped her apology would carry some weight. In the end, after hours of deliberation, a compromise was reached. Karen avoided prison time but faced serious consequences nonetheless. She was banned from ever returning to the United Kingdom, a ruling that crushed her dreams of revisiting the country she once loved. Additionally, she was ordered to pay a substantial fine and complete community service upon her return to the United States. As the verdict was read aloud, Karen exhaled deeply, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over her. The nightmare was far from over, but at least she wouldn't spend years behind bars. Still, as she left the courthouse surrounded by flashing cameras and shouting reporters, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been forever changed. The world now saw her as the woman who dared to grab a Royal Guards rifle, and the price of that momentary impulse was heavier than she could have ever imagined. The room Karen sat in was small and cold, its walls painted a dull gray that seemed to absorb any trace of warmth or light. A single overhead bowl cast harsh shadows across the space, making her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. She hugged her arms tightly around herself, trying to stave off the chill that crept over her skin. But it wasn't just the temperature, it was the weight of what had happened pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open and two officers entered. Their expressions were unreadable, their faces masks of professionalism. One carried a clipboard while the other stood near the door, his arms crossed. Karen's stomach dropped as they pulled up a chair across from her. "Miss Karen," one of them began, his tone clipped but calm, "you are aware of why you're here, correct?" Karen nodded quickly, her voice trembling as she replied, "Yes, I know I messed up. It was stupid, and I'm so sorry." Her words spilled out in a rush, desperate to explain herself before things got worse. "I didn't mean anything by it. I thought it would be funny. A dumb prank. I never imagined it would turn into this." The officer raised a hand to silence her. "We need answers," he said firmly. "Who sent you? Are you working alone, or do you have accomplices?" Karen blinked, stunned. "What? No one sent me. I swear, I acted on my own. There's no one else involved." Her voice cracked as panic bubbled inside her. Why did they think she was part of something bigger? Wasn't it obvious? This was all just a reckless mistake. The questions kept coming, relentless and probing. Had she planned this ahead of time? Did she realize the severity of tampering with a Royal Guards weapon? Was she affiliated with any groups or organizations that might pose a threat to national security? Each question felt heavier than the last, chipping away at Karen's already fragile composure. She answered as honestly as she could, tears streaming down her face. "It was just me," she repeated over and over again. "I didn't plan anything. I swear." Despite her pleas, the officers remained unmoved. They documented every detail of her responses, occasionally exchanging glances that made Karen feel like she was being dissected under a microscope. For the first time, she understood how serious her actions were, not just to the guards or the palace, but to the entire system of order and protection surrounding the monarchy. The rifle she had grabbed wasn't just a prop. It symbolized authority, discipline, and centuries of tradition. By touching it, she had crossed a line she hadn't fully understood existed. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Eventually, the officers left her alone again, locking the door behind them. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Karen leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. She replayed the interrogation in her mind, each question echoing louder than the last. Why did I do this? She wondered bitterly. What had started as a fleeting impulse, a momentary lapse in judgment, had spiraled into something far beyond her control. Later that evening, Karen was transferred to a holding cell within the palace grounds. The tiny, barred room was even colder than the interrogation room, with only a thin mattress on the floor for comfort. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted to her family back home. How would they react when they heard about this? Would they be angry, disappointed, or would they rally around her, offering support despite her mistakes? The thought of facing them filled her with shame. Her phone had been confiscated, leaving her completely cut off from the outside world. For the first time in years, Karen felt truly alone. The gravity of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had always prided herself on being spontaneous, fearless even, but now, that same spontaneity had landed her in unimaginable trouble. Every decision she had made leading up to this moment played on a loop in her mind, each one a reminder of how easily things could go wrong. As the hours dragged on, sleep eluded her. Instead, she stared at the dim light filtering through the bars of her cell, wondering if anyone outside knew where she was. Would news outlets pick up the story? Would strangers judge her based on headlines without knowing the full context? The thought terrified her, but more than anything, Karen feared the consequences yet to come. Whatever punishment awaited her, she knew she deserved it, and that realization weighed heaviest of all.